So good part of the day, dear students. Today we are going to have the integrated course of foreign language teaching with you, and our new topic is setting aims, objectives, and learning outcomes of a lesson or sequences of lessons. So, what do you think? What are learning outcomes? Learning outcomes are specific statements of what students will be able to do when they successfully complete a learning experience, whether it's a project, course, or a program. They are always written in a student-centered, measurable way that is concise, meaningful, and achievable. So, for designing each lesson, we have goals, objectives, and outcomes. So what do you think? Are they the same? Do they have the same meaning? What is your opinion? So today you will find out the difference among them. So how are learning outcomes different from learning goals or learning objectives? These terms are often used interchangeably, and they are all related to the teaching and learning that is expected to take place in the classroom. However, the difference between goals and objectives and outcomes lies on the emphasis on who will be performing the activities. Learning goals and objectives generally describe what an instructor, program, or institution aims to do, whereas a learning outcome describes in observable and measurable terms what a student is able to do as a result of completing a learning experience. For example, course, project, or unit. So, in short, we can say that learning goals are what you want your students to learn. So learning objectives are the same. What about outcomes? Learning outcomes when your students will be able to do something. So why do we set learning outcomes? Learning outcomes help the instructors or teachers to describe to students what is expected of them, to plan appropriate teaching strategies, materials, and assessments, learn from and make changes to the curriculum to improve student learning, to assess how the outcomes of a single course align with larger outcomes for an entire program. So, outcomes are phrased from the perspective of the student and are written in language that can be easily understood by them. Learning outcomes help students to anticipate what they will gain from an educational experience. And learning outcomes also tracks their progress and know where they stand. It helps them to know in advance how they will be assessed. So, how to plan our lessons easily? The clearer the structure of a lesson and the more precise the directions on what is to be accomplished, the higher the achievement rate. So it says that the structure of your lesson should be clear and your instructions should be short and clear. Only then you can reach your goal. So what are educational objectives? Educational objectives are the learning outcomes of a lesson, what the students should be able to know or do at the end of the lesson that they could not do at the beginning. And specify the new skills that the students will gain as a result of the lesson. Educational objectives focus on students' attainment, not teachers. They determine the degree or criterion for satisfactory attainment of the objectives. So how do we set our objectives? What kind of phrases we use? For example, when we are setting the objectives for culture lesson, let's say, you can formulate your objectives like the following. So the students should know, for instance, what is culture shock. They should do something, they should feel something. So each defined objective is matched with teaching method, learning activities, and type of assessment. It should be mentioned that relevance is the essential quality of the educational objectives. Of course, all your tasks and activities should be relevant to the topic you are teaching to. Otherwise, how you can reach your goal? So you can set course learning objectives using the following formula. As a result of participating in quantitative reasoning and technological literacy, students will be able to evaluate statistical claims in the popular press, and so on. So here, the objectives of one course is given. For example, at the end of the course, the students will be able to render a video and so on. So pay attention. It shows what is goal, what is objective, and what is the learning outcome. And this table also contains some examples. Here, 3 different subjects are given, if you pay attention. So let's pay attention to the English one in the middle. For example, the goal of the English lesson is to introduce students to modes of satiric writing in the 18th century. The objective of the English lesson is to familiarize students with a number of substantive 18th century texts. Students will be trained in the close reading of language and its relation to literary form. The learning outcome is students will analyze the relationship between the language of satire to literary form by the close examination of a selected number of 18th century texts in a written essay. Okay, you can also use SMART goals here. So what is SMART goal? SMART is abbreviation, that's why each letter stands for one word. S is strategic, M measurable, A attainable, relevant, or T time bound. While setting your goals, you can also take into consideration the SMART goals. Okay. Some teachers face some difficulties in writing lesson plans, and 6 common mistakes I'm going to give you, and you should try to avoid them. So, poorly written objectives lead to faulty inferences. So that's why objectives are so important. Before designing your lesson, you have to decide what are your objectives. Second one, the lesson assessment is not connected with the behavior indicated in the objective. So your assessment should be connected to your objectives. You can come out from your objectives while assessing your students. Third one, prerequisites are not specified or are inconsistent with the lesson requirements. Fourth one, the materials specified in the lesson are relevant to those described learning activities. Fifth one, teacher's instructions are inefficient. 6. Students' activities do not contribute effectively to the lesson objective. So if you are going to be a teacher of English, you have to avoid this kind of mistakes while designing and conducting your English lessons. So when you are explaining the objectives of your lesson, you have to tell your students what specifically will your students be able to do at the end of the lesson. What will they understand? You should provide content and information. You should explain the concept. You should give some definitions. You should identify some critical attributes, and you have to provide some examples. This can be done through your direct instruction, or this can be done by the help of the video, pictures, demonstration, questioning, discussion, and many other kinds of strategies. It depends on your understanding, on your method, way of conducting your lesson. So modeling, the teacher demonstrates the use of the skill or knowledge. And checking for understanding, you can ask your students to explain concepts, definitions in their own words. And you can encourage your students to give some examples of their own. And you can motivate some active participation. And guided practice activities can also be helpful. And it should be pointed out that before planning any lesson, you have to ask yourself, what are the inputs? What is the output? What do I expect the student to be able at the end of the lesson? What will I do in order to make that possible? How will I break up the time into main stages? What will be the main stage building? What materials, aids will I need to achieve these aims? So there are different types of materials and resources available, especially now in the century of technology. But it depends on the talent of the teacher to choose the very materials that can be useful in your lesson and that meets the requirements of your lesson. And one more important thing is teachers should self-assess. Address the major components of the lesson, focusing on both strengths and areas of needed improvement. And you have to also to determine here how you plan to collect information that will be useful for planning future lessons. A good idea is to analyze the difference between what you want and what was attained. Okay. So thanks for your attention. This is the end of our today's lesson.